Welcome in to the SPL, happening a little bit earlier than normal here at Goremizer because we've got to deal with some of those rescheduled games happening for Team Radiance. So we appreciate you joining us a little bit sooner than normal, but we're certainly going to be having some excellent games here. And as I just alluded to, starting with that one with Radiance, let's take a look at the updated schedule for today. This is Radiance versus PK that we're having first, then Ghost versus Sanguine, certainly to be a good one, and then Radiance versus SSG. So a tough doubleheader here for the Radiance boys, but one they're going to have to come out of here, I'm thinking, Core, with at least one win after their last week.
And a very gold right side of the day, right, for the schedule. I mean, a lot that's coming through. But like you said, maybe a much-needed win here for Radiance. They didn't have necessarily the best comeback that you would have wanted. You know, a few weeks off of play, their games being rescheduled, then we had the bye week, so now, you know, coming into last week, things maybe just weren't as fresh for them, right? Maybe not as well practiced, well rehearsed. We saw the same thing happen with Sanguine. So this is that week to kind of showcase that last week was rust and not maybe the, you know, the play falling down for you, and that you kind of brush it off, you're coming into this week fresh. And I think this is a good kind of warm-up set to tease into going up against Space Station, right? Because like the Knights, it's going to be a little bit easier historically in matchup that has gone towards Radiance, and maybe can help warm them up for someone like Space Station.
Maybe so. We can only hope that this PK team is easier for them to take down because, as you said, it gets harder later on. But PK has been playing well. Last week, I think we saw Cubo Fred piloting the Tsukiyomi whenever it was available, and I wonder how big of a resurgence that might be for this squad, because I think when Cubo Fred looks good, Gore, that's when PK look almost unbeatable. So maybe getting this pick in his hands can be the difference maker, right? Can be getting him back onto something that has hyper carry potential.
Yeah, it was actually really refreshing. I think we've talked about it a lot, and Fred hasn't necessarily been the kind of topic of conversation when we're always talking about the Knights. And you can bring up Zap, you can bring up Paul, you can bring up Neil. Every now and then, and more often than not, especially around Amaterasu, we'll talk about Scary D. But it always felt like Cubo Fred was thrown in there, just like as the, okay, well, we talked about everyone else, we gotta talk about the jungle, right? He's not been detrimental to the team, but it definitely does feel like the Tsukiyomi kind of give a new breath of air into the jungle for the Knights, and that's where they've been struggling most of the year. If you look at the sets where they've lost, it really does feel like sometimes it was just wherever the junglers were. Maybe Cubo was farming up a little bit longer than you see out of his opposing jungler, and all of a sudden the impact that you're seeing on the other side is a little bit more. So if they can get him on this pick, I think they're going to feel confident with it.
I'm excited to see if they end up grabbing it, but I don't know that Radiance are going to allow them to do so. Radiance is one of those teams that if you're good at it, they will ban it away from you. Some teams kind of let something else get in the way. They'll ban the meta picks. Maybe they don't trust you so much. Not Radiance. But I'm a bit worried here about how this Radiance team is going to look. They struggled when we saw them last week. I know that they have the potential to be one of our top teams, be one of our best teams, Score, but are we going to see that here?
That's, you know, the question of the day, really, is which team are we going to get out of Radiance? Are we going to see the ones that we saw last week, or are we going to see the ones that, you know, are pushing Ghost Gaming the distance and causing them trouble? You know, it's so many different varieties that we've gotten to see all year. I mean, even going into playoffs, everybody was kind of like, man, Radiance hasn't been looking too great, and they showed up that weekend. So they have this, you know, ability to show up where their ceiling is just incredibly high compared to what we've seen out of it. But sometimes their floor is low. Sometimes they show up and they aren't necessarily the best team on that day. And this is one of those weeks, especially because, you know, this week, next week, you're making up these postponed games. You have to be able to show up and be that top team. You can't afford to come in and take some of those losses, or else you'll lose some pretty dramatic spots in the standings at this point. You're already kind of teetering there below SSG and Ghost. You don't want to really fall into, you know, 4th, 5th, or 6th if things just go catastrophic for them.
It's getting scary now with E United looking much better. Obviously, Obey's been on a resurgence. Sanguine kind of dropping. I think there could certainly be some shifting happening in these standings if the top teams aren't careful and if they don't make sure they're performing cleanly. I mean, even there was a while there where Ghost hit a little bit of a snag. I think they've recovered at this point, but you're right. Now, this Radiance team, for me, it felt like when you see things like Aurora on the Hercules, it wasn't quite there for them last week. I wonder if that would be able to come back here as well. Let's go ahead and get into those picks and bans for game number 1. That way we can see exactly where they'll end up picking it, but it felt like they were used to kind of having Aurora be this sort of early game bully for them that can get them at least a small lead beginning of the game, but that kind of stuff wasn't taken off. Not that he was playing poorly, but just that teams weren't giving him those same invade opportunities. It felt like maybe the execution wasn't there as much. Maybe they're going to find some other kind of way to come into the late game in a comfortable spot.
I think that is something that maybe has caused Radiance some trouble, and I think it's honestly caused some trouble for a lot of the other teams, right? When you notice that specific players have a certain style, you can play against that once you realize it, right? And, I think we're recognizing that Aurora and PBM both like to be a little more aggressive. You can try to find ways around that to at least slow it down. With Ghost, not a lot of teams have been able to stop it. With Radiance and SSG, not a lot of teams have been able to stop their styles of play so far lately. But I think with Radiance, it's become a little easier to handle. If you handle Aurora in the duo lane, then the only person that you really have to stress out about early is going to be adapting. So if you can just shut down the support in the jungle almost as fast as possible, then they start to have a slower game. And that could be the key for the Knights here to maybe get a handle on it. If you need Cuvo to pop off, the best way to do that is to make sure adapting does not have a good game.
Exactly right. It can be difficult to try and get off to a good start in the jungle when adapting is lining up across from you. Now, so far, these bans are fairly standard. I like this Freya ban, though, from Radiance. Zapman just played it in those highlight clips we saw, even getting so aggressive as to solo invade speed, kill the jungler who was there, and take the buff and leave. So this is great awareness, but I'm a little bit worried, man. Tsukuyomi is still available. Both of the hunters, Cupid Rom, are still available. Amaterasu still out there, too. And I would be very surprised if PK do not prioritize that Tsukuyomi or some kind of pairing with it. Amaterasu Tsukuyomi, Cupid Tsukuyomi, something like that would make total sense to me in the spot.
Well, it was really interesting because last week we saw a lot of teams, specifically I think we were talking about how Sanguine had mentioned that they thought it was incredibly strong, that they thought Tsukuyomi was someone that everybody should be picking. And then only twice? No, I think we saw him 5 times throughout the entire set. A couple of teams sprinkled him in there, but he was never really in the top 3, and the only teams that, won with it, Knights, were able to find one of them. But most of the time, you see these teams that were saying how strong he was not even going for it. So I'm wondering if the Knights are going to hope that that's still the case here and they can put it off, or if they need to scoop it up. Either way, it is that weird shuffle you have to make. And I also think it's important to note, I was looking at it, I had a weird bender last night where my version of having fun was making a bunch of stats come through. But, one thing I had prepared for Waiting Room today to drop was the fact that Radiance, when they're on order side, like they will be in this game, have a 72% win rate, so they're more likely to win over here than they are when they're on the Chaos side, which they have a 57% win rate. But also Rom, he's not been winning a whole lot. He was picked 14 times last week. He lost 10 of those games. So, it's one of those things that they're having some stats that are battling each other here. Rom hasn't been successful even though he's been a top pick.
Very interesting to think, right, that Radiance have that big of a disparity. I believe you told me that was the biggest disparity based on side that you saw in the SPL for Radiance. So that's huge that they're this much stronger when they're in the first pick or order side spot. Those are the same. So they'll take the Rom, Terra, and Wukong. And I'm very surprised by this early Terra pickup because the last time we saw Terra, she struggled, didn't she? It just didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And you don't have to worry so much about Terra being taken. But I think in this matchup, it makes some sense, right? Into Sobek, Terra's an excellent pick. When she's got the monolith up or the walls, Sobek becomes way less valuable against her.
And especially, I was actually having this kind of epiphany the other day, but Sobek, depending on where you're going, specifically here, the Terra, like you said, we've seen Sobek more often than not over there in the duo lane. She's going to be able to counter that. Worst case scenario, Stone of Gaia really helps shut down a lot of what Sobek does.
Sure.
And so even if that is like a flex, although with Amaterasu there, you can expect it not to be, I think there's itemization that this Wukong can get that even still makes this Sobek feel a little bit worse off. I also think this Hebo is someone that's worth mentioning because I was just looking at it, not been successful for the Knights as a whole. Again, just as I was looking through it, they picked him 10 times throughout Phase 2 so far, so this will be number 11. They've won 3 games with him. It has not necessarily been the most successful god coming through, even though it is one, especially when you go back to Phase 1, that we were equating to Paul. He was one of the only heroes that was coming through and making it look fantastic.
I would certainly still call it a signature pick, even though Twig is playing it quite a lot as well over there for Ghost. I mean, it's something that Paul played when he was in the minor league too, and then brought right up there with him to the SPL. So to catch up on these pick bans a little bit, Cupid and Tsukuyomi banned from Radiance, and those are so heads up to the point where I'm surprised PK didn't take either of those in their first 3 bans. So especially when you already have Rom, take that away. When you know that Cubo's going the Tsukuyomi, take that away, and now he'll have to drop down to the Unbots. Now this gives PK a sick team fighting comp, right? Dazzling offensive, the Sobek there for setup, and then the Fear No Evil as well, and all this damage from the Habois. It's just a matter of if Radiance can bolster all that inside all these team fights, if they can weather the storm that is all of that team fight CC that PK has.
And I really like this just as a read from Radiance. They grab this Daji because what are they lacking a lot of? I mean, Sobek, CC Immune ult, Hebo should be able to, but when those ults are down, especially if they're using them to engage on a team fight, Daji can pick up the scraps. I also like the fact that this has been adapting, I want to say like a pocket pick for him. He was pulling it out a ton in phase 1, and then it kind of disappeared, and now she only comes out when he really needs her to step forward. And speaking of someone that's a pocket pick, this is I think only Obey at this point have played Raw, so this is a really spicy pick for Radiance.
Well, they're kind of borrowing the whole strat here, aren't they? They didn't play Erlung, but Daji is very consistent setup into the Searing Pain snipe from Raw, which is exactly the combo that I think Obey have really started to build their identity around, something similar in terms of how it executes. And you are right that you'll be able to get out of it with the Lurking in the Waters or the Crushing Wave, but Unbots does not have that same luxury. Perhaps this idea is meant to try and punish Cuvo in particular here, Core.
Honestly, it is one of those easy outs, right? I mean, we were highlighting it coming into it, but Cuvo, like, I don't think if Cuvo has a bad game, that means the rest of the Knights fall with him, but I do think that if he has a good game, the rest of the Knights rise with him. So if they can just stop that where it's at, which I think Daji and Ra are going to do just fine, then I don't know that the rest are going to get to flourish. Then it's up to Paul all of a sudden to step up. Scary D has to have insane rotations on this Amaterasu, which more or less will be matched and handled by the Wukong. So you're looking at a very few key pillars for the Knights throughout this game to really kick the door down. Otherwise, Radiance, their draft, even though like I think it has some synergy issues, maybe working together in the middle of a team fight, will still be able to come out consistently over the Knights.
Plus, Daji just has the safety, even if the combo doesn't work. Radiance and PK in the rescheduled match. Let's go ahead and kick it off.
We have a triple header Friday of SPL action for you, and it is kicking off with Radiance versus PK. Radiance, of course, playing in our third match of the day as well. It is Dolson and Mifflin working the cast, and of course Doug working the camera for us. Hey, you at home, make sure to vote in chat. Let us know which way you might be leaning here on this one. And Mifflin, maybe after recent performances from Radiance, chat might be leaning a little bit more for PK in this one. Radiance has some ground to make up.
Yeah, the reigning world champions, and they come in with a pretty nice comp here. I'm worried about how well BMT is going to be able to survive into this frontline dive that PK has, just with Paul and Cuvo Fred playing that role inside of the mid. Normally, we brought it up on the desk that Radiance is kind of bringing a comp that is reminiscent of what Obey likes to play, but with the advent of Daji exchanging out the Erlang Shen, they're losing a little bit of that frontline presence, that ability to make sure that BMT isn't going to get dove nearly as well. When Adapting and BMT are going to both be susceptible to damage, I think it's going to make it a lot harder to perform on this draft.
All right, definitely the parallels will provide a little bit more maybe ranged setup for some of those Searing Pains from big man Tings, and that could make a difference here in some of these fights. Small note, Paul going Blink. First relic there out of the mid lane is going to use it just to reach this level 2, and this is what we see sometimes from Hebo. Massive chunk potential if you're able to farm out that wave first.
What an absolute bully. Using the blink early on just to get that pressure. I mean, it's not going to amount to too much there. Ross should get his heal around level 2, so he should be able to sustain up within his lane. But it is going to stop them from having any sort of aggression playstyle with this Daji. Maybe that's what we're looking for from Paul.
Cuvo and Adapting both make their way over to the mid lane. Wondered if maybe there'd be an early red buff invade. We started to see a lot more of that, Mifflin. Teams feeling a little bit more comfortable pushing in over onto the opposing team red buff, maybe more born out of long lane pressure. Now maybe a good time to pivot and look over what we've got there. Zapman piloting the Heimdall here. Neil with that Sobek as well. Plenty of setup early in this game for the PK long lane.
It is interesting to me that Heimdall has kind of remained within the meta as this fringe ADC pick, especially considering that the recent meta build for Hunters being so attack speed centric doesn't really mesh very well with the auto attack chain that Heimdall has. He's going to be generally auto attacking slower, even if he does decide to go for that, you know, Silver Branch Bow, Odysseus, Kin-size style build. I think we might see something a little bit different from Zapman here, maybe a little bit more ability focused with his build, just to help out. I think cooldown could definitely be very useful for this Heimdall, just for that additional CDR on the ultimate to make sure that he can make sure that Powwow doesn't pull him in.
Right. Well, chat still leaning 65% of the way towards Radiance on this one. I mean, still a very strong team here, but back-to-back losses to teams in the bottom half of the league standings-wise. you know, we're still getting into the meat and potatoes of Phase 2 really here, Mifflin. Plenty of games left to play. Standings obviously open to shifting up. And for PK, very important as well. This is a team that is, you know, found it hard to break into that top 4 spot. But with a win here, they'll be at least tied with Sanguine as far as wins and losses go. This is a PK team that's starting to maybe find its rhythm.
Yeah, they're looking really good. I've been considering them just the gatekeeper of the top 4 for the longest time. They're the, okay, sometimes we're able to punch up, not nearly as consistently as I would say even like some of the more bottom-seeded teams are. Like, if Obey beats out a top-seeded team or E United does, it's like, okay, that's expected. They're not going to win consistently. But PK will win very consistently against the lower-seeded teams, but not so much against the upper. If they're able to really get their things together, really start working as a unit, iron out these drafts, start to, you know, diversify their aggression, I think that's really where we're going to see them take it to the next level. And recently, PK is looking like they're making those strides.
Yeah, and you know, I think this is a hard one to kind of put your finger on. I don't think it's necessarily a must-win for either squad, but I think for PK, if they're able to win, they kind of put that, you know, can't beat those top 4 teams sort of storyline by the wayside. You know, they 2-0 last week over Sanguine, so maybe already that should be by the wayside. But now you look towards Radiance, who really needs to get back towards their winning ways, maybe get some momentum building up. It's all about playing your best Smite and peaking at the right time, and that's what Radiance are going to hope to be doing a little bit more of. Paul, heavily poked out by BMT, had to go back to base just a few moments ago. A bit of a difference in the mindset already in mid lane builds. Paul just going to finish off the full-on purple boots for a little extra early power there. Big Man Tings opts for 1 tier of his boots and then maybe into a Doom Orb first overall for this Ra.
Yeah, Doom Orb first for Ra, pretty standard build, helping out with the movement speed. It really synergizes well with the passive that Ra has, just making sure he's able to zoom around the map. That mobility is going to be hugely important just to make sure that he is able to avoid that dive, just not having that tanky jungler, meaning that he's going to be largely left alone in the 3v3 until Aurora is able to rotate out. I think that it's going to be a very interesting pick because sacrificing the earlier movement speed that would have been just straight up boots is going to make him a little bit more susceptible in those early game ganks, maybe until level 9, level 10 once he gets that second item online. But for now, Paul, despite having a slight XP deficit, is going to be much more impactful in the fights just because he's a Hebois.
Whoa. That's a blink in from Aurora, adapting in on the follow-up. Will not dash in towards Paul here. 3 members of the Knights grouped up over by the blue buff. Cubo Fred sends out the monkey and will end up dashing towards it. Aurora, though, will walk himself away. You can see what Radiance were looking for there, Mifflin. 4 members collapsing, knowing the Knights are moving towards the blue buff.
Interesting that Radiance is the one trying to be the aggressor at this phase of the game.
Yeah.
Maybe they're looking for just an early pick, adapting, maybe finds an ultimate, followed up with BMT's ultimate himself, and then immediately try and disengage because PK, they fight well.
Well, Aurora has to waltz his way away from the pluck there from Neil. So no setup on the back end of things there. Aurora will stay alive. But I think that's maybe what we expected to see, a small collapse from the Knights early on here in this game. And, you know, I think you look towards the Knights and a lot of the setup that they have, the beads burning potential is absolutely going to be important as far as the Fear No Evil being big here for Cubo Fred. And so if you can get Big Man Tings, I suppose that's kind of the downside from what we've seen from this Ra, is when you can jump on him deep in that backline, it's very, very difficult outside of some of your own healing and maybe some move speed to disengage from these fights.
Yeah, if he doesn't have his beads available, Fear No Evil is just about a death sentence. You could use the ultimate to CC him out a little bit, but either way, you're just going to be standing inside the damage from Hunbot's ultimate or from whoever else is deciding to aggress on you there. So I think it's really going to come down to how well is Aurora able to peel out the backline. And with Terra, the Unearthed Fury is going to be able to just get a little bit of additional burst healing, maybe drop down your 3 to peel out with a root. But it's going to be very, very difficult once we get to these 5-on-5 engagements or even around this first objective fight for BMT to position himself in a way that's not only going to keep him safe, but also where he's going to be able to find a damage output, especially considering Paul does pick up those early blink. He's going to be able to just walk right past the front line of Radiance, blink through, find the water spout, crushing wave on the tail end, and Hebo with this build early on is going to have enough damage likely to shut down BMT on his own.
How much do you think that also kind of depends, though, on who engages first? I mean, you look towards adapting. He'll be able to dash right on in onto Paul, and then the Palau's there on the follow-up. No beads for the mid lane Hebo. So maybe there are some of the same threats to the Knights, that are also there for Radiance, maybe both lying with the jungler, whoever is able to find that dive onto a, I say somewhat immobile, both have extra move speed and can move themselves quickly, but no like disengage necessarily ability to quickly move from one spot to another. Maybe the onus is more on the junglers to find a pick here. It's a Fear No Evil. Oh, BMT over the wall! Finds the one to shut down Cuvo. The Searing Pain hit there as well. Pin perfect from Radiance. As I'm talking about the junglers needing to find an impact, instead it's Cuvo Fred who goes down first.
Man, BMT immediately dropping the ultimate to trust Aurora's stun. I mean, we had the beads come through there for Hunbots. It just wasn't fast enough. Every single bit of damage comes through, and that was a completely blind first ability from BMT over the wall through red. He had no vision onto QVO Fred there. That was 100% game sense. This dude's playing incredibly well. If you're hitting shots like that, Ra might be one of the best mids in the game.
That's why we started to see the rise a little bit more. It's interesting. You know, this is Obey not playing in this set, of course, but the Ra now kind of trickling into the compositions of some other teams. We've seen the Ymir start to shift from inbound to a few of the other support players. We've, of course, seen Ymir outside of just inbound here in the past, but other teams maybe realizing if the setup is there, there's definitely some truth to what Obey are trying to make work in some of their sets. So I love seeing it here for Big Man Tings. And Myth, now he's got First Blood, he's got that Doom Orb online. The move speed and the rotation potential is going to be huge. And you got to talk about the objective execute potential with his ultimate as well. Could be some early objectives on the board for Radiance.
It could be. His damage output on objectives is still going to be slightly lower than Paul's,
right,
despite having, again, about a half level in his advantage. But the added benefit of being able to use it from a range, it's more so the steal potential. PK is going to have to play very carefully if they want to be the aggressors on a Gold Fury or a Pyromancer. Just ever constantly aware of where Big Man Tings is going to be standing on the map, just making sure that the Searing Pain isn't going to be in range for the steal. But I think that PK's draft has good ways to work around that. Neilma as an iron wall on the front line should be able to disrupt or make sure that no one's able to walk through easily. If Scary D rotates out, he should get a little bit more value from his rotations than Benji will. He'll get there slightly slower because Benji can turn into a bird and fly wherever he wants. But once Scary D does get there, Dazzling Offensive, just the passive on objectives to help out with Burn, he's got a lot of tools that are going to be able to utilize by PK to get some early objectives.
Well, we've seen Paul opt for this Rod of Tahuti early on in most of his Hevo mid builds. Palau's used by adapting there, traded out the Lurking in the Waters from Neilma. Always a threat with adapting. Those Palau's have the ability to CC so much of what the Knights are bringing to the table. Only a couple sets of beads, one for Cuvo. Just now back off of cooldown. Might have to use him here. Fear No Evil drops down onto Benji. Adapting, moves himself in. The bleed might be enough damage on the back end, but Cuvo Fred stays alive this time. Adapting, stunned down. PK collapsing in on the Daji. That's the tail whip up and over, and Neilma finds the pluck for the kill. Aurora's had to leave elsewhere in the fight as well. As we stand, it's 1 for none.
It is, and that's an early rotation from Cyclone Spin. It seems like Radiance was trying to put a little bit of pressure on the map. If they were able to pick up that kill on a Cuvo, they likely would have fell back to Pyromancer with that overcommit rotation from Cyclone. But now losing out on the fight, also losing out on the positioning, they're going to get invaded on that blue buff Benji. Going to have a much harder time sustaining up through this lane. And Cuvo has the added benefit of able to respawn pretty early on. He doesn't miss out on any of his own farm because PK was able to defend their buffs relatively well. So he shouldn't even fall that far behind. He's actually about 2 levels up, despite being 0-1.
Yeah, man, that's wild, isn't it? How the game has kind of turned there, where it looked like adapting was maybe driving most of the early pressure here in this game. Cuvo Fred, of course, falling early on to First Blood in the mid lane. But the farming has been enough. A solid 1-level lead, maybe 1.5, as you point out there. You know, maybe interesting, Myth. We don't see Hunbats all that often, really, anymore. I mean, he's definitely a pick that we have seen. And, you know, it's not a wild surprise when we see him picked, but I may be a little surprised that we don't see him more often. There's plenty of utility and damage in that kit to set up for the rest of your team.
You know, I would agree with that, and I think I do. I think Hunbots is definitely an underutilized pick, or at least undervalued, but I think it's because recently he's got a couple of nerfs to the ultimate timing. You know, Fear No Evil is not as ubiquitous as it once was, so you're going to need a little bit more setup CC on your team. You need something like a Dazzling Offensive to burn off the beads. You need something like Sobek Pluck to, you know, target out these guys and make sure that their CC immunity goes down. Because in the days of old, when Fear No Evil was on like a 90-second cooldown, you could blink in, drop your ultimate. Okay, I didn't get a kill, but I burned the beads. I'll come back in 90 seconds. They're going to be absolutely dead next time. It doesn't. The timings don't work out nearly as well as they used to.
Well, Benji, not with a teleport this time, is kind of looking at relics. It is beads. Now for the Sun Wukong out of the solo lane. Sledge first item instead of that Soul Eater. Obviously, Sledge has been a popular item out of that solo lane, but I feel like when we've seen Sun Wukong, it's been that Soul Eater first item overall. Get some of that early lifesteal online. Will be the Soul Eater. Still locked in nonetheless, but obviously seeing a little extra value with maybe the Sledge first and foremost.
Interesting decision to go for the Soul Eater a little bit delayed. A stacking item like that, you kind of want to get online as quickly as possible so you can get the full value out of it. Maybe he's worried about having to rotate out a little bit early or some gank potential from Cuvo. Hunbot's one of the few gods that can actually kill a Sun Wukong in lane just because of how long his CC lasts. So maybe we're just a little bit concerned about the gank potential, but instead he is going to eventually get that Soul Eater. It's going to be a little while until he's going to feel confident to rotate out a lane. I think Benji's going to be sitting in that short lane until he gets that stacked up, and then we'll see him try and make some waves in these team fights. So far, neither team has looked towards the Gold Fury just yet, but that could be a product of the fact that it's only about 300 gold separating these two squads 13 minutes in. It's a very subdued playstyle from PK. Normally, they try and bring the fight a little bit earlier on, but I think Radiance has been doing a good job of setting the pace.
Yeah, and normally in those moments, especially with these early Gold Furies, you start to look towards which team maybe has built themselves a little bit of a lead over in the long lane. Right now it's Zapman with the 1-level lead, but down 1 level to Aurora, so somewhat even, all things considered there. Cyclone Spin moving into the Devourer's Gauntlet, and Kin Size as well right after that. So some early health damage there for Cyclone Spin, trying to get this ROM spun up maybe a little bit earlier.
It is, but he's going to have a much harder time trading into Zapman in that 1v1. If he's looking for pressure in the long lane, that might not have been the way to do it. Cyclone Spin should be a little bit more valuable in the team fight, but PK realizing that, decide, okay, well, if we can't do gold, let's go ahead and get that other objective. Pyromancer goes down for free, and no response from Radiance as they're grouped up in mid, trying to maybe see if they can catch someone straggling about.
That's a free Pyromancer just to pull a little bit of that gold lead. 15 minutes in. Couple of kills on the board, 1 apiece, and it's a 1,000 gold lead for the night. So look at this immediate answer by both teams, shifting over towards the Gold Fury. Oracle's respawn, so there could be a small engagement for those just to buy some vision, and it looks like we've got a split issue there, so neither team able to lock down both. And they'll back themselves away, stay alive for the time being. Scary D is feeling comfortable enough to maybe invade over onto this blue buff here. Both tanky enough, probably no solo kill potential there. And an interesting build path, we've talked a little bit about the Sledge into the Soul Eater. How about the Berserker Shield, first item overall on this Amaterasu?
Makes sense for Ama. If you're looking to poke someone down with auto attacks, if you're an auto attack centric just warrior in that lane, it's going to help you out with a little bit of sustain in lane just because you're a little bit tankier. She's got the built-in healing within the kit, so you're going to constantly be looking for poke. Against a Sun Wukong, it's going to be a little bit less impactful. That's an item that's a little bit more impactful once he starts to rotate out a lane, start hitting someone that doesn't have a Soul Eater and that can't full heal off of hitting a wave. It seems like Scary D's kind of leading his build a little bit towards the later game, and it seems like both teams are very content waiting for that late game team fight phase. But so far, PK have done a good job of just to separate themselves on the map. They've been controlling the neutral objectives relatively well. Mid camps have been largely going PK's way as well, so they've got about 2,000 gold in their favor. But Radiance is constantly positioning around this gold.
Well, Scary D maybe felt like, and obviously did feel like, if that ultimate connected, he would have taken a kill away maybe from Benji there, but an easy bird form away. So Scary D without that dazzling offensive for a little bit longer. Has the Thorns online now for the Amaterasu, so come team fight time, not only will she be doing damage just through her own kit, but reflecting a good bit back to Radiance as well as they try to peel themselves away from the solo laner over in Scary D. 4 beads for Radiance. We talked about maybe the need to pick up an extra set of beads here, especially, you know, with the Fear No Evil, but also a lot of team fight ultimates there for PK to peel away the beats from Radiance. So the setup is definitely there in multiple facets from this PK squad. Though Radiance feeling a little bit more comfortable with where they stand at this point. Gold Fury 50% HP here. Neomorph first in, lurking in the waters. Could be looking for a detonate. And Radiance take this one away. No real chance there when BMT has the Searing Pain. So smart objective, but no real answer from the Knights.
Yeah, Knights were very slow on the rotation in there. There was a slight grouping from them around that red buff where they hovered for a little bit. It seems like Neil was the only one who was really willing to commit himself. Maybe he was trying to go in, see if he could find the steal. They weren't really in a great position to fight their way in there. If he does get the steal, fantastic. If he doesn't, maybe he's hoping that Radiance gets a little bit overzealous and chases out. And PK had a 3-stack on that red, so there would have been a slight collapse there, and maybe they could have caught someone just overstepping their boundary just a little bit. But instead, Radiance pulled away relatively easily, despite a little bit of hesitation on it. We saw them drop it, reset it a couple times. Cyclone didn't seem like he was really willing to tank it up until BMT got there with the heal. But good play from Radiance. Now they've about evened this game up completely. This late in the game, 18 minutes, nearly 1,000 gold separating these two teams. That's nothing. It's a completely even game. XP, largely even as well. There's only the largest deficit being 1 level for the Soul Laner Scary D and 1 level for Cubo Fred in favor of PK. It's not enough that I think that Radiance should really concern themselves with this. If there's a team fight happening, they don't have to go into it thinking that they're at a deficit. Instead, it's going to come down to which team has the better team fight, which team's able to utilize their ultimates a little bit more easily. And considering Radiance have been playing passive, it's going to be hard for Adapting to get a lot from Palau.
Oh, Adapting blocks the dash from Scary D. Just a 3-man rotation over to the solo lane. Can he dodge the Palaus or just one more to sidestep? And Scary D is able to do it, but the tower dive continues nonetheless. Oh, it's the aggro traded at the last possible moment, and Adapting will stay alive. One more kill goes over the way of Radiance, but how about the answer from PK over into the long lane? Neil has taken about half of his HP, a lot of it from the tower. Cyclone Spin being collapsed on now. There's the Fear No Evil, no chance for him to live there. No beads for Cyclone, 1-for-1 trade, but a tier 2 tower in the long lane for PK.
But maybe a tier 2 tower in the solo lane in favor of Radiance. It's only going to be the Hebo there to try and rotate it in. Paul has damage, but he doesn't have the numbers. He can't feel safe moving in. He does find a little bit of poke, but not enough to stop them from taking this tower. But with them resetting here, if PK stick around, they might be able to go for a cheeky Fire Giant if they're able to spot this out.
What an interesting game from both of these teams. Both are just kind of playing their own way, it feels like. Right there, Radiance were hell-bent on getting a kill over in the solo lane, and the Knights answer back with something in kind over in the long lane. An immediate mirrored answer back from both teams. Dead even effectively in that trade as well. The big differentiator, Mifflin, might just be the Pyromancer here that the Knights are able to take away.
Yeah, we're getting to that point in the game, 20 minutes in, where both teams have been allowed to free farm a ton. So everyone's starting to level up a little bit more quickly than you would in a more aggressive type of match. So now we're starting to see the mid laners taking over to level 18, level 19 for the soul laners. Fire Giant is a real threat at this point, and I'm expecting to see them start to group up on it, both teams, in the coming minutes. Look for those 5-on-5 Fire Giant dances, and then once we do get there, that'll be the first true 5-on-5 engagement of the match. And I think this is where PK is really going to shine. It's up to Cubo Fred to come up in a big way for his team. If he doesn't get a lot of value out of Fear No Evil, if he's not hitting at least 2 members or burning off beads from at least 1 priority target, that could just be a 1 fight for Radiance.
Well, there's a small opening maybe right now for PK where there's a level 20 Zapman to only 19 of Cyclone Spin. I mean, that gap is going to close quickly here. The item's effectively the same, but look at this answer from PK. Cyclone Spin has to go back to base. Fire Giant started up by the Knights. Now Benji plugged in, silenced down by Scary D. 25% HP, make it 10 now. Oh, the Fear No Evil on the follow-up. But the Somersault Cloud just in time from Benji. And the Knights have used a lot to try to get this kill, and they weren't able to find it. Aurora, though, stunned down, plucked back, taken out by Cubo Fred. That's the up and over on the disengage as well. Palaus, no good this time. The Knights have found 1 free kill, and there were snipes down from Radiance. All 5 ultimates off the board from the Radiance squad. It's only the Knights who tally another kill.
But Radiance maintained their actives pretty well. Cyclones weren't even up. His beads weren't even up for that engagement, so he's able to hold on to his. Those that died maintained their beads, except for Aurora, who loses out on the Frenzy. So there's still a lot of defensive positioning, defensive utilities that Radiance have for them that they can use to move in. Unless Paul just wants to.
Oh my god, Adapting, no chance there. Paul is going to sidestep the fadeaway 1 from BMT there. Benji's looking for the kill, the knockup. Disengages Benji for the moment, but Cyclone Spin from range takes out the kill. Nearly gets Scary D as well, but suddenly the ROM is under collapsed by the rest of
Good
PK.
shot.
Neil just wide on the pluck this time, but there's the up and over from Cubo Fred. You just need a little bit more damage, but Radiance still full on in on the chase, and there's some sustain out of BMT in the mid to maybe slow down this fight for Radiance.
PK have to fully disengage themselves, and Radiance have a little bit of healing in the kit. If BMT is able to group up around his team, drop the Solar Blessing, we might be looking at a Fire Giant attempt. PK can't back up here, but they're not healthy.
Yeah, they have to stick around, but they can't stick around. I mean, either way, you're rolling the dice here, I think, if you're the Knights. It's a Fire Giant down to 10% HP. Zapman off to the side. Scary D, maybe the real chance to take this one away. Cyclone Spin snipes down onto the Heimdall. Bye-bye to Zapman. Fire Giant still quite low here. Scary D on the re-engage. Cubo Fred goes in. Oh, but it's a Fear No Evil from PK that steals it away. Cubo Fred comes up big. You lose the rest of the fight. It's a triple kill from Cyclone Spin, but PK, they pull away the FG.
Hey, FG on 2 members, I'll take it every single day of the week. Trade out 3, there's no Phoenixes exposed at this point. Radiance can likely get away with trying to siege down this mid Phoenix, but with Paul, a Fire Giant, a Blink coming up in the next 30 seconds, oh, you don't even need it. Just look for the water spout and the Crushing Wave. He's going to be able to shut down this push if he's able to get into position. When he backs a little bit slowly, Radiance is going to get this Phoenix largely for free, but better than a Fire Giant.
Well, Neil, plenty healthy here, lurking in the waters. They want to fight for this mid lane Phoenix. Really what they're doing is buying some time here. So Radiance, they do lose the FG, but they get enough kills to walk down the mid lane and take that Phoenix away. Wonder now if maybe Neil tries to continue pacing this one out. There is some healing from the rest of Radiance to allow them to disengage, and it looks like that's exactly what will happen. There might be a Primal Fury, though, Mifflin, on the back end of this if Radiance back up too far.
Yeah, PK should just be able to get this Primal. I'm not sure that Radiance would even be willing to step up here. They've used a lot of their utility. They've used a lot of their abilities just trying to disengage themselves from that mid-Phoenix. I think they're absolutely willing to give up this Primal Fury. Unless Aurora goes for a steal himself, it won't come through this time. No miracle play for the Radiance boys here. But Primal, not the biggest deal at this point. Fire Giant's already down. Pyromancer's not going to be that contested of an objective. It's up to PK to try and push down mid a little bit. If they're able to get that mid Phoenix back, they won't have to worry about contending with these Fire minions. And having Fire Giant on Neilma, the support, means that they're going to have a very easy time taking up these towers. Having it on Paul means that they're going to have a very easy time killing at least one member. Water Spout and a Crushing Wave is a death sentence for almost everyone except for Benji on the side of Radiance. So I think PK can still work and play around this Fire Giant as if they have it as a full crew, but they're going to have to contend with the sustain that Radiance is bringing from BMT. Maybe they just played a little bit more safely.
Yeah, a moment of respite, really, for both of these teams here. A chance for both squads to take a breath. Mifflin, we had effectively no action for the first 15 minutes of the game, and suddenly things have erupted around these big respawning objectives. And the Knights, though, down in kills, up in gold. Map pressure still may be tilting with Radiance, but now you got to look at what the Knights are able to do with a little bit of the extra pressure that they've built up here. It's a tier 1 tower finally falling over in the solo lane, and Radiance answer back in kind. How many times have we seen kind of this mirrored push where the Knights are happy to tit for tat kind of with what Radiance are doing?
And it's twice now, but again, it's an interesting decision. 2 members of Fire Giant of the Knights, 1,000 gold lead, you know, negligible, but you've got the better team fight composition this far into the game. I would like to see the Knights group up as 5 and not allow Radiance to strip away the map. They're allowing Radiance to kind of expose PK's base when they don't really have to. Now that left side Phoenix is going to be readily to go down. The second that Radiance gets an advantage, they can find a couple picks, they can group up and look for it, whereas otherwise, had the Knights grouped up as 5, they would have likely been able to keep up that tier 2 tower, keeping the base a little bit stronger. Now we're in a position where both teams could very easily end the game if they get one clean team fight.
It could just be one more fight on the other end. A minute and a half left until the Fire Giant will respawn. It's only 20 or so seconds left for PK on this buff. Imagine not much more will be found here. You start to look at some of the team fighting that the Knights have opted to do. A lot of it centered around Neilma, of course. The Lurking in the Waters have looked for engagement, as well as Cubo Fred. Have some of those great aura items on Neilma as well, so the fighting around the Sobek seems to make sense. There is a missing Gauntlet of Thebes, though, on Neilma's support build, the support item favorite, but instead, Miff, that's going to get placed over with Scary D here. Obviously a good enough item that Scary D feels like it's worthwhile rounding out his build with.
It is, but rounding out your build with it means that it's not going to be stacked up 27 minutes into the game, so that aura not going to be a huge factor in these team fights for PK until Scary D can finish that up. But now the Fire Giant wears off. It's going to be respawning in the next 40 seconds. PK, their mid Phoenix, it's respawning relatively soon. Having Cuvo on the team on Hun bots, we can likely take just about any 1v1 in mid, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him over there. But Neilma, trading out this much of your health this early on, not a good idea. PK need to play a little bit more passively on this Fire Giant dance. Any bit of poke that Radiance get is going to be much more valuable than any bit of poke that PK get, because BMT can heal his whole team.
That is the mid lane Phoenix now that's back for PK. Really the big story we've followed is which jungler, which team can engage more consistently on the back line of one another. I suppose that's the whole point of SMITE, so maybe it's a non-statement here. But Cyclone Spin left completely unchecked on that FG fight is really what gave Radiance the edge after Cuvo Fred was able to steal it away. A triple kill from this ROM down the end here gave Radiance a good advantage, really, in opening up some of the base. Neilma looking for the pluck over onto Benji. Aurora there to follow up as well. Paul a bit separated. Scary D looking for the back line. Some snipes down from Cyclone Spin will keep Paul somewhat low, adapting. Powwows, big man tings, snipe. Down goes Paul out of the back line. Now Radiance, they smell blood in the water, but talk about the fear no evil from Cuvo Fred. That one finds at least 3 here, and the dazzling offensive follows up for some damage as well. It's a double kill for Zapman. Neil has another as well. The Pittsburgh Knights, they've turned around this fight, and they've gotten themselves a win.
Yeah, Radiance just commits so many resources just chasing down Paul. Zapman, you're alone here, bud. Play a little bit safe. If Benji's able to turn around, find the stun, BMT should have the damage to put him down, but instead, Zapman playing confidently, stepping forward, at least stopping the backs while the rest of his team gets in position not only to defend their mid-Phoenix barely, but to reposition around this Fire Giant and make sure that objective goes their way. There's nothing Paul could have done there. He got sniped out by Cyclone Spin, adapting, blinks in, uses the powwow, doesn't quite connect all of them, then he gets sniped out again by BMT. I mean, he was as far back as you could want your Hebo. He uses the ultimate defensively, almost puts himself right next to those back camps, falls anyway, and because of that overcommitment from Radiance, PK was able to move in, rout the enemy, just completely pincer attack every single engagement, almost artificially manufacturing 2v1s or 3v1s in the jungle, and it's going to net him a Fire Giant as well.
Yeah, I don't think anyone from Radiance steps up here. Benji close by, but won't be in time now. There's a fear no evil on the back end. Benji taken low and now taken down by Cuvo Fred. It's an FG just shy of the enhanced Fire Giant, so I guess a sigh of relief maybe there from Radiance that it's not enhanced, but then you lose Benji on the back end. Sun Wukong, unfortunately, just a little bit too far forward. Pyromancer as well. This Knights team, now in the driver's seat, they control really their destiny here in this match if they're able to siege down the space.
Yeah, Fire Giant on 5, every single bead's available, wards in pocket. PK's got 2 Phoenixes exposed to them on the side of Radiance. They're probably going to group up, take down this tier 2 mid tower first. Primal Fury, I mean, why not? You got about 3 minutes to work with anyway on this Fire Giant. It's not going to open up the map at all. I'm sure they would have preferred to be an Oni minion wave Fury, just so you can work through every single lane. I think that PK are in a position where they want to group up as 5. I think that they could have Scary D be the sole split pusher because he's got that additional movement speed in the first ability, which is going to allow him to reposition himself into the team fight if it does erupt. But with PK's team composition, having Cuvo Fred on this Hunt bots, having Paul on Hebo, means that they should be able to win the 5-on-5 engagement a lot more cleanly. I would like to see them stay grouped so that Radiance can't look for these separated 1v1s and potentially find a pick.
It really does feel like if PK can dodge out some of the ranged poke as well. Big Man Tings and Cyclone Spin, we talked about how Paul really stood no chance in the previous team fight, and the Hebo wasn't able to get off maybe enough of the damage that Paul was hoping for. So that's definitely a big factor here, especially if you're the Knights and you're pouring kind of in a straight line into a lot of that. So something I think you have to be mindful of. But it's a 3-2 split for PK. Mid lane Phoenix now being looked at by Cuvo, Scary D and Paul, Neo and Zapman. On the other side, half HP on the mid lane Phoenix. The Radiants have done just enough to stall things out. Half HP on the left side Phoenix as well. Might just be waiting for one final minion wave, or Radiants might have to engage.
Yeah, if they keep dancing like this, I mean, both Phoenixes now at 50% HP, no engagement from Radiance. If anything, Radiance should group up as 5 and try and exploit the fact that PK are split.
Aurora drops down the ultimate, but the mid lane Phoenix is going to end up going down here. The snipes onto Paul, take away half of his HP, but there's some sustain out of the jungle here. The Soul Gem is going to provide that much. Not really a defense, I don't think, there from Radiance, Mifflin. They poked down some damage. Aurora tried to engage on the backline, but then kind of nothing. PK just walk down the left side, walk up the mid lane, and take both Phoenixes.
But Paul does lose out on his blink, as does Neilma. Radiance lose out on their best re-engage, counter-engage, disengage, just straight-up engage tool inside of Aurora's ultimate. So I think that PK are in a position where they could decide to just immediately group up, start to push down that right side, collect a minion wave, group up on that last Phoenix, and force an engagement. But with only 50 seconds left on this Fire Giant buff, they might decide to play it a little bit slower. These Phoenixes went down very late into the Fire Giant cycle, meaning that they've got a lot of time to work with. PK can absolutely wait for this next Fire Giant, pull it away themselves, force Radiance into either making the decision to defend their base from fire minions or move in and try and take a disadvantageous fight around the Fire Giant itself. But PK group it up in the jungle to see if they can catch anyone lurking.
It's interesting play here from the Knights. As you point out, no Fire Giant to be had just yet, but you look at the map pressure that the Knights have, left side and mid lane, all pushing into the Radiance base, so somebody's going to have to deal with that come Fire Giant respawn time. Definitely ideal scenario now for the Knights, and this is one, Niff, really on the back end of that Cyclone Spin triple kill, it felt like Radiance were maybe slightly more in control of, even maybe at best there for that for the Radiance squad. But this is where you expect Radiance to be firing on all cylinders. There are kind of these late game team fight engagements, but the Knights have now shown that their team, they're going to be able to team fight very successfully in some of these late game skirmishes as well.
Look, I think we could chalk up the issues of Radiance's draft, and I hate doing it to just one guy, but adapting has gotten nearly zero value in the last 15 minutes. This Daji pick hasn't. Has he pulled anyone in this game? I don't think I've seen a pull come through yet. I don't think he's found any 1v1 picks, and it's because PK is staying so grouped up. Daji is this pick that can really work out in ranked or casuals or even competitive incredibly well if you have a draft that's able to split up an entire team. But because PK is staying as this 5-man death ball, if adapting blinks in, looks for a 1, a knockup from Paul will kill him. If he just 3s in, anybody's going to kill him because he's got no disengage anymore. It's very hard for Daji to get in.
Neil has the pluck onto Benji here, half HP on the Sun Wukong, and the big man Tings used the Searing Pain to try to disengage for his frontliner in the previous fight. So now, execute / objective steal potential heavily mitigated for Radiance, at least for the next few moments. Somewhat low cooldown, already back to 25%. So if things are delayed enough, big man Tings plenty fine with maybe throwing that one out. It is a somersault cloud, though, from Benji. Maybe a little bit more nerve-wracking. Aurora first through the door into the backline, but Zapman sends him elsewhere. Neilma, half HP, adapting, plucked on back right into a Fear No Evil, but up to the parallels goes the Daji. Paul will finally execute Aurora on the backline. Neilma still lurking in the waters. It's a double kill for Paul on the Hebo. Zapman is going to have to make his way back to base here. There's the big man Ting's ultimate back off of cooldown. It's a 2 for none, and the Knights happy to head back to base.
That's exactly what I'm talking about there, man. Adapting gets plucked in by Neil, loses out on 90% of his health, barely survives, is able to get to the Palau, but has to dunk down relatively close by, falls immediately afterward. Aurora goes in with the blink, trying to find a huge engage, have his team follow up with him, but lacking a lot of AoE damage from his squad. He didn't get a lot of value out of his ultimate, immediately falls just to the raw damage output from Zapman. This attack speed build, so absolutely strong at shredding tanks. And now PK get another Fire Giant to themselves, but this time it's going to be the enhanced Fire Giant, and with 2 Phoenixes coming back, barely in a cast, hobbled, that left side Phoenix is going to take about 1 auto attack to go down. PK are primed and in a good position to just blow open this game. If Radiance put up any sort of defense here, until Adapting gets back up, they're going to be taking at a disadvantage. If anyone dies, it could very easily result in a Titan death as well. Well, the Phoenixes went down so easily last time. Now they have no HP, so immediately back onto cooldown go both of the birds. Yeah, I'm not sure. Back to the ashes to be arisen from, I guess, in a few minutes now for PK. And you can see the priority here has been a lot of anti-heal as well from the Knights. They have the Ankh for Neilma, who's been
lurking in the waters more often than not, just chilling on the back line of Radiance. Now it's a Toxic Blade picked up for Zapman as the boots are sold off this late on into the game. Brawler's Beat Stick as well for Cubo Fred. So, you know, a lot of these sustain that Radiance felt like they might be comfortable with between the Terra, you know, the Ra, some the Soul Eater as well, some healing from Cyclone Spin. It's been mitigated, I think, somewhat well by the Knights.
It has been, and now Radiance grouping up deep in the enemy jungle. Going for a Hail Mary.
Oh, it's the snipe onto Neoma. That does half of his HP. Scary D being looked at by Adapting, who's now gotten himself in the kill feed. A split fight finally for Radiance. And they're able to capitalize onto Scary D. Cubo Fred exchanges blinks with Adapting here. Beads used as well. Up to the Powwows. Goes Adapting. He's got a couple chained in. Down goes Cubo Fred. Radiance, despite maybe a losing initial engagement, now able to find two. Zapman has to disengage as well. It's Paul, Neil, and Zap against all 5 from Radiance.
That's the best you could hope for from Radiance here. Adapting going to be forced back to base, so PK looks like they're willing to re-engage. They still have the blink on Paul, who's going in.
Aurora waiting to maybe find the stun here, but won't have it. Cyclone Spin plucked through. Zapman gets the kill. Cyclone has stayed just a little bit too long. You have to be careful chasing out the Ra. He'll do some decent damage to you when you're on the engagement. A bit of an overstay there from Radiance. They thought maybe the Knights had fully disengaged and kind of thrown up their hands. But anything but. Now Cyclone Spin takes a seat for the next 45 or so seconds. Might be slow goings here on the push, Mifflin. Knights still only have 3 members.
Yeah, Radiance can never be accused of making it an easy win for their opposition, despite a nearly 20,000 gold deficit. I think it's closer to 15. Don't do math on cast. I can hear aggro yelling at me right now. But it's not enough. PK, at this point, we're so late into the game that it's really just elixirs making the difference in these builds, maybe true 6 items slotted.
Right.
The relative power spikes this additional 10-ish thousand gold is going to be able to do isn't enough to separate these two teams. 40 minutes in the game, Radiance is functionally even at this point. Adapting finally gets a fight where he's able to split up PK, takes off separate 1v1 engagements, finds his pick separately. Cubo gets his beads forced out. Powwow finally pulls someone in, results in another kill, and that's the strength of Daji. If they can continually find those engagements, that's where we're going to see the value coming through. But PK aren't willing to give it up again. This time, they're grouped up as 5 and making a concentrated effort on the enemy base.
Well, there's only 1 Phoenix left standing. You figure Radiance has to try to defend this one to save 3 fire waves from pouring into your base. At this point here in the game, we are cresting that 40-minute mark. This is where Radiance and PK even both kind of like to play. They slow in the early and then rip these games away from you in the late. Only 15 seconds left on the enhanced Fire Giant. That's why Neil may be pushing the issue just a little bit more. Aurora finds the backline a little bit there with his ultimate, and there's a stun down onto Zap. But not much else comes of it. Wasn't the ultimate actually ended up popping there from Aurora, or it did end up going on cooldown. Cyclone Spin tossed out the snipes as well. Aurora, though, half HP, he has to dash away. Big Man Ting's just wide on the snipe. Scary D, stunned down. Pittsburgh Knights, they're finding these engagements, now Adapting alone in the backline, looking for the Powwows, but there's nothing there. Now he has to leave as well. Radiance Mifflin, they maybe just throw out 4 of those ultimates to try to weather the storm that is the Knights, and that was their goal. They did their job.
Radiance did such a good job on that defense. The second the Fire Giant buff wears off, they engage themselves. They commit 2 of their ultimates on that initial engagement to force PK into disengaging. But they do no more than that. Aurora goes in with his ult and then immediately disengages himself. We see Cyclone Spin go up into the air and try and find some poke down onto Paul, and he does find it, forcing him to play a little bit further back. And then once PK heals up a little bit with their own buff, they immediately move back in, and then Radiance use the last of their ultimates. It really forced them off yet again. BMT finds a nice snipe in the backline. PK thought they were playing patient, but not patient enough, lose out too much of their health, and are forced to back up. But forced to back up might be a little bit too harsh of language there, as they're going to back up and pick themselves up a re-up on that Fire Giant.
Well, you can see immediately what the Knights are pinging for, and it's obvious, you know, it's obvious what they're going to go for here. Both of the downed Phoenixes now respawning, the right side Phoenix still standing as it has the entire game. But the Knights not splitting up here. They want to stick together. It's worked out for them up to this point. Snipes up from Cyclone Spin, looking for some damage. Aurora thrown on back right into the Fear No Evil. Down he goes, but Adapting trades back one onto Zapman, who tried to get himself away. Looks like the bleed damage on the back end was enough to kill off the Heimdall. That's maybe a net win now for Radiance, a support for a Hunter. It's something Radiance got to feel good about on the defense.
They can't feel too good about it, though. Zapman's not really needed to take down these structures because they're already so low. Adapting with that positioning is forcing PK to split up. Now it's a separate 3-on-2 and 2-on-none engagement on the left side of the map, but all three Phoenixes go down. PK, they're done. We got everything we needed here. Let's go ahead, pick up the Primal, Zap, pick up your old bones. We're going to regroup once you respawn, and we're going to make a push for the end. But it seems like Radiance every single time has been able to put up a strong defense. They haven't been able to make a clean win on any of these engagements. The siege potential from PK is looking a little bit weak. Their engage potential being so contingent on Cuvo and Scary D being that one trick potential of, we're going to blink in, I'll drop Fear No Evil. Okay, well, I only hit 2 there. They use their beads, or they use their CC immunity to the ultimate, and now they're re-engaging. Or Scary D goes in, and he's getting absolutely shredded by Cyclone Spin at every turn. If this ROM is allowed to auto-attack Scary D can't operate. It might be up to Paul to find a blink in, water spout, crushing wave, instant one-shot Cyclone Spin to open up the team. And it's not often that I'll say this, it might be a valuable trade in favor of PK, even if they do lose out on the Hebo.
And I mean this with all due respect. That's like the Captain Twig mindset, right? I mean, I'm going to go in, I'm going to die, but I'm going to get all of my damage off. I know you hate us mid laners when we talk about dying but still being able to do our damage, but if Paul is at least able to do that, maybe a net win. It's been really both of the supports as well, of course, as the junglers. I mean, how many times have we seen a roar blink through, drop the ultimate, pop the frenzy, and hope that something happens once more here? Here he goes, onto PK. Zapman eats double snipes from Cyclone Spin, but Adapting goes down before he's even able to make his way into the Powwows. It's a double ultimate from Cubo Fred. To the side, to the lane you go, Radiance, but Benji answers back, as Paul will end up falling here. Cyclone Spin stays alive, but not much longer. Nilma on a killing spree here. Benji, BMT, they've got to retreat. PK, 4 members strong. They might make their way into the Radiance base.
Hey, nowhere else they should be except for maybe shutting down Benji here. Cuvo playing with a little bit of fire. This Sun Wukong,
the minions,
not going to be that fire that I was worried about.
BMT's
but BMT, the only one left alive for the next, 40 seconds? Best of luck. We've seen plays like this in the past, but you couldn't call it anything short of a miracle. It's going to be Zap and Neil, the first ones rotating in there. I mean, a 4-man snipe into a 4-man one with a 4-man block.
He's got it!
He's going to have to play perfect.
It's a tall task, to be sure, and at this point, the Knights might even be able to just ignore the Radiance mid laner and just walk in towards the Titan. Still 3 members with that Fire Giant buff. Zapman just missing out on it. Big Med Tings backpedals his way into the fountains. It looks like Zapman's just going to get it done all on his own. PK in a 45-minute game. Pull this one away from Radiance.
And pulled away is the right word to use, because in those late game team fights, the only thing separating these two teams was the map pressure, was those Phoenixes. Radiance play incredibly well on the back foot for nearly 20 solid minutes.
Right.
But PK didn't make any egregious errors. They didn't make any mistakes. It was slow going, but that's because they weren't willing to put up any risk. Had they maybe decided to group up as 5 earlier on and go for one of those pushes, they could have lost out on the entire game. So instead, they slowed down the match. They burned through your mid-Phoenix 4 times, and I can't fault them on it.
Yeah, the engage was just maybe too consistent for the Knights here. A lot of Aurora dashing in. The follow-up wasn't quite as immediate as maybe Radiance were hoping for. The woes continue for this Radiant squad. 1 loss away from going on an 0-3 streak. Not something we expected to see from this team. The Knights continue keeping their pace with another win here over a top 4 squad. 1 win away now for back-to-back top 4 wins from them. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back into Game 2.
Well, PK are able to grab the win over Radiance, upsetting everybody. And if you want to upset everybody in your games, then I have exactly the promo for you. Shoot out and ship up with the exclusive Code Eater Bakasura skin that's available now for Amazon Prime members. And they just showed me this skin. It's quite sick, and if you like Bakasura, you should pick it up. You can claim the exclusive Code Eater Bakasura skin this month with an active Prime gaming subscription as part of our partnership that we're having now with Prime Gaming to bring you all some incredible rewards. You can also use code or use !Prime in chat, I believe, as well, if you want to take a look at a little bit more about that. So some cool stuff that's coming out there for you, and some cool stuff happening here in the SPL as well, as PK are now very close to unseating Radiance here, Gore. And there were a couple things that you and I were talking about a lot behind the scenes this time that we thought that Radiance didn't have quite working. The Terror pick seemed to struggle. The Dodgy pick seemed to struggle here as well. What stood out here for you, Gore?
It's a little bit of both. I think there, it goes back to what we were talking about actually right before we started that set, where we were mentioning, you had mentioned Hercules not getting through a lot for Aurora, so he's had to kind of go to some of these other picks. And Terra doesn't really, like, when I think of people who play like Hercules that are that aggressive, Kuzenbo can come onto the list. There's a couple of others that, like Sobek, who has displacement. Terra's not really high up there, and I think we got to see a lot of that suffer here. There was a lot of moments where he was able to maybe get a dash off and go in and either root the enemy, or maybe he'd have good healing, maybe you'd see a stun, but you didn't really get a lot on the Aurora front. Now, out of the 8 games that she's been played in Phase 2, she's lost 7 of them, so she's not been very successful all around. It's not just Aurora. I think it might just be Terra as a god right now, and this meta doesn't seem to support her too much, as even there, Paul just eviscerates her with his ult. But then the other thing we were kind of talking about was this Dodgy. When we saw it picked in, we looked at it, and originally I was like, I see Dodgy, I think the other side must not have CC. And then everybody except for Hunbats had CC ultimates on the side of the Knights. So they didn't really have that much to worry about. Cuvo went beads early on, so adapting really couldn't get a lot of ults off. I think the first time, at least that me and you noted, seeing him pull in, specifically Cuvo Fred, was like 37 minutes into the game, so adapting didn't really get that jungle impact that you're looking for out of the Dodgy.
No, I don't think that it was there either. And of course, well played by the Knights on the opposite side of this as well, right?
Yeah.
Zatman, I think, going with a different build here. He got that Ichvile in the 3rd slot on Heimdall, which I was talking to Agra a bit about it behind the scenes, likely to try and get that additional power, which Heimdall can leverage well. And that is what happened. I mean, Zatman was able to get some nice escapes there with the Bifrost and able to find some big kills. But just talk about the engage here as well. I felt like that was the big difference, was that PK had this Sobek and Amaterasu that could start fights for them, whereas Radiance they were hoping a Dodgy ultimate to go alongside the engages from Aurora, and neither one of those was able to get off the ground here at all. They had a lot of trouble starting fights, and PK, on the other hand, did not. And they were able to be the beneficiary of that in multiple fights throughout this very, very long game. This went into like the 40 minutes as they got a little bit later on, despite how this game started off. So I think you got to give a lot of credit to PK for the way that they drafted, the way they executed with those picks. We'll see here if they have a chance to do the same thing. Picks and bans for game number 2 are ready to start off here, Goran. Radiance in that first pick spot again. You were the one that told us that first pick is usually where Radiance get their dubs, but it did not work.
Well, this was, I guess, just pre-really, really long break Radiance, right? Like, everything
right,
prior to that, right? I mean, you take, 3 weeks in a row off? I think you're going to have a little bit of suffering, but right now, it feels like it's falling through. And you had even highlighted it, in the last draft when we were looking at it. PK just had a good team fight. I mean, they had 4 or 5 ults on that squad that were just going to be a problem to deal with. I mean, so, okay, cool. Maybe you make it through the dazzling offensive. Maybe you don't get plucked by Sobek. Oh, cool. Now there's a Fear No Evil. Man, there's no winning there. So you really have to be careful. I think you were playing with fire there if you were Radiance. So this is your chance to, again, maybe bounce back. And I'm more interested than anything to look at the bans and maybe either what Radiance changed, the Hell, the Persephone still being down there, but if PK lets something slip, because I do think the picks, both for Adapting and Aurora, are almost essential for this team. I mean, you go back and look at the stats screen, they're the only 2 who really were, I want to say, non-impactful for the game. Big Man Tings had a good game on Raw, you had a good game out of Solo, a good game from your carry there for Cyclone Spin. Yeah. You just didn't really get the impact in the team play and that 3v3 that was crucial. So maybe if Knights let something slip, which so far Yamoja, Hercules, they're not, then maybe there's an opening for Radiance, but they're really going to have to work this out.
They are. This is going to be difficult, I'm thinking, for Radiance, trying to figure out what their identity is. I mean, I think it was Tings who tweeted out that he just wasn't sure what else was working, was even considering running the Guan Yu mid. Now, I think that's a bit glib. Probably not going to bring the Guan Yu out in an XPL match, but I think it did highlight something that is a bit more real, where they're not so sure what their identity is anymore. Teams are not letting Aurora dominate the early game like he used to. Adapting has been struggling a bit in the jungle these last few weeks as well. I think that this is a team that is not so sure where they turn to in these must-win situations. And we saw that Tings was able to make the Raw work. It's not as if nothing is working for this team, but certainly finding a consistent strategy that is helping them win games holistically, and that's been evasive for Radiance here lately.
That's one of the more interesting topics to kind of look down, because when you look at Radiance and you look at their picks and bans, you look at their history, they're one of those teams that's more likely to target ban you, right? They don't mind letting things that are quote-unquote meta through the ROM. I think the Amaterasu, two things that have been picked and banned out by some of the other top teams lately, being able to make it here, I guess, as a note. But realistically, they're okay target banning you. They're okay picking up their own flow, and it feels like they've just forgotten some of the counter picks that they used to love, or some of the flavor they used to have, just maybe not working the way that it did in Phase 1, that it did in playoffs. And as of right now, you can start to see the effects it's had. Knights being able to play a little more consistently here in Phase 2, as well as just kind of on the rise lately, seem to have really been reinvigorated up against this team. And they get to start with the Amaterasu Sobek again. I don't know, like, it just feels like a really good start for the Knights. Even if you lose the Hunbats, those are two incredible picks.
They are, and it's going to be scary for Radiant in the exact same way, in that they could be struggling with Engage, whereas PK have no problems within the Charge Prey and Dazzling Offensive to potentially start these fights off. Now, I do think that this Unbot's pick is a pretty big deal, even though I'm not exactly enthused by the Terra coming back through. This gives Adapting something that can contest a little bit easier in the team fights than what we saw from that Daji, who was struggling to land chains, who was struggling to get any actual pulls in those team fights as well, and really do what the Daji was expecting to, even struggling to stick with Paul on the Hebo, who was using Blink to get away from the Trickster Spirit throughout that game too. This was a tough one for them, so I'm glad Adapting is on a different look. They kept the ROM, which worked for Cyclone Spin, and we'll see if Aurora can make the Terror work twice. But now PK have the central core of what made that draft work in Game 1, which if you're a Radiance fan out there, should be pretty scary.
I do feel like the main difference is going to lie in this one, Bats. So, we were talking about it a lot, but Paul last game, rushes the Rada to Hootie, goes Blink first Relic, right? Didn't have a lot of survivability when it comes down to it. I mean, you're Hebo, you're going to get shredded if you get caught out there. And the Daji didn't really utilize that information, I think, to the best of the abilities that, we've seen Adapting display. But this Hunbats for Radiance, not only is it going to be good, I think, against a Hebo, especially if they go the same build there for Paul, but it's also just been historically good for them all year. It's their most winning god for Radiance, and granted, a lot of this, I think, was in Phase 1, pre some of the nerfs that we saw to Hunbat's ult, where the timer got a little bit longer. But as of right now, he's in a pretty similar spot. I mean, still maybe a little worse off than he used to be, but of the 20 games, now I guess 21 that they've played him in, he's won 15 all year, so that's really good for them. Plus, like you mentioned, and I think is always going to be worth noting, that big Fear No Evil that was, I think, strong for the Knights last game is only going to open up more avenues for Adapting this time.
Oh no, they banned the Cupid here this time instead of the Tsukuyomi. In the world where they took the Unbots away, Gore, I don't know. I'm pretty sure PK would want to take it right away, especially because Zatman was so comfortable playing the Heimdall last time around. I'm so surprised by this. Maybe they thought that PK felt they were missing some of that big team fighting CC without the Unbot, so they might default back to the Cupid to sort of make up for some of that. But we're seeing right away that they're going to take this Heimdall for PK, and now they have the chance, if Cuvo likes the look of Tsukuyomi here, especially with Unbots already picked up for Radiance, they'll get the 10th picket here coming into this draft. I'm a little bit worried about that.
And what I love is this gives the Knights the opportunity to wait. I mean, someone like Cthulhu getting locked in makes me think of this. Tsukuyomi is who you're highlighting. Nemesis is still on the board.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's so like I like the fact that the Knights held that jungle pick so long because it gives them this perfect counter sway that they're exactly going to have as pick number 2. Plus, you had mentioned it for the top 3, but I think adding Heimdall onto it, we just saw all 4 of these find pretty large amounts of success. Nobody on the Knights really felt like they were falling behind, so this is really solid. I like the Agni, though. I like the Cthulhu. I do still think that the opening for a Nemesis here is maybe a little bit too much, but I really do. I enjoy Radiance's squad this time. It's just whether or not they can make it work.
Looks like Cubo going to be going with the Camazotz instead, and this is pretty far from both the Tsukiyomi and the Unbods and even the Nemesis in terms of the control that those could have been able to provide through their slows, and the ability to have some of that CC. Camazotz has some of the slows too, but so much more known for his ability to get up into the sky, to be unable to be peeled off of whoever he tries to stick to, and perhaps he can stick to the Agni, but the dash, very good at creating space for him. Rob can go up to the sky. I mean, certainly the Camazotz can work, but don't you feel like the Nemesis and the Sook could have found some value here this time around?
Yeah, I feel like they would have been stronger picks, especially when it comes down to potential counter playability. But you also have to, I think, roll it back. When you go back to Phase 1, once again, looking at the year-long picture, Camazotz was one of the most oppressive gods that was in the game. I mean, he was top banned. I think if he was available, picked, would flex over to solo sometimes, although with the Amaterasu, I think we can shove that out of the conversation window. But, I mean, a lot of survivability, a lot of sustain that comes in with a Camazotz, as well as good damage and, like you said, good chase down. While I think Hunbats, the Agni, honestly, even the Cthulhu are going to have a pretty, not necessarily easy time with them. I don't think they're going to struggle too much. If Cuvo gets off to a really great start, then we might be having a different tune to the conversation. But just in a blanket vacuum, this Camazotz has a lot to prove coming into this game.
Agreed. Radiance have the better control this time, but PK have the damage. Let's see how it works in game number 2.
It is interesting how the Knights can roll out 4 out of the 5 same picks, Mifflin, that we saw in Game 1. But the substitution of this Camazotz for the Hunbats is definitely the most impactful. How many times did Cuvo Fred nearly perfectly set up some of those engagements? I think a big piece of lockdown, and Neilma, of course, still on the board, and Scary D there as well. But this Camazotz maybe has me a little bit more shaky about this PK draft than I was in Game 1.
Yeah, this Camazotz pick is a question mark to me, not because it doesn't have inherent value, not because it doesn't have all-right counter matchups into Radiance, but there were better options available, Dave. I mean, Tsukiyomi, as Finch highlighted, would have had a very easy time ganking out the duo lane. This Rom would have been free food. I mean, just a disarm into a stun would have been a huge tool with a slow to chase down. Or let's talk about Nemesis and the Cthulhu. Cthulhu goes up into the Descent of Madness, gets a little bit of additional damage mitigation. Never mind, Nemesis just hits you with her ultimate, and you lost out on 30% of your health. But instead, picking up this Camazotz is going to help out with damage output in general. The ability to chase down Agni with the slow, the Vampiric Bat is going to be very good there, as it will be against the Rom as well. I think that maybe we saw that Cubo was a little bit concerned with his ability to stick around in these team fights. If adapting was able to blink in, find a huge Fear No Evil, at least now you can go up into the ultimate and just, you know, swoop out of there or swoop in if you so choose. It seems to me that Cubo is either looking to win out incredibly early on through some early game ganks, or he's just worried about his survivability in the 5v5.
And I think it's absolutely necessary to look at the changes that Radiance made as well. The Sun Wukong, you know, had the damage in some of those fights, but Somersault Cloud often used on a disengage. I think what Radiance have drafted here, notably minus Daji plus Hunbats and Big Man Tings with some extra lockdown there as well, they've now drafted Radiance a wider variety of ways to lock down targets and have themselves a better team fight. So I think Radiance immediately out of draft have set themselves up a little better than how they were in Game 1.
So much better. Agni out of mid is going to have some ranged engage, could burn out some beads on his own to set up for adapting. Survivability is there. Adapting on this Hunbots is likely the biggest upgrade. Just having a tool inside of Fear No Evil that's so much more easy to apply. Blink in, drop your ultimate. You're going to get value no matter what. It doesn't matter. It's not like Palau where they need to get pulled in. At least you're getting maybe 0.1 seconds of a fear where you're burning beads every single time. There's no real opportunity to straight up miss that ability. I think Radiant's got a straight up upgrade across the board.
Is that technically a skill shot? No, right? I mean, because it's your body then that's the aim, I guess. I don't know why I thought about that. Yeah, I mean, you miss it if you're not standing on them, I guess. Not a skill shot. I'm making the ruling now because your body is the aim, and I'll hear no different moving forward here. I think Big Man Tings on the Raw, though, in Game 1, did have a good game. You know, I think all things considered, the snipes were hitting pretty consistently, even found first blood in game number 1. And I like that the Agni, of course, has some extra lockdown potential with the stun, but also still brings some of that same pressure that we saw Big Man Tings do so well with on the Raw. The ability to sit back, siege down large amounts of damage in some of these fights, especially if Aurora is going to be continuing his trend in dashing in, dropping the ultimate, and creating space.
Yeah, I think that the BMT on this Agni pick is just a straight-up better matchup into Hebo as well. Ra struggles to find that poke. Agni hits at level 5, and he's going to be able to drop at least 1 Rainfire, potentially 2 if he finds the stun as well. He's going to have a lot more survivability. He's not going to be largely immobile. This time he's going to have a dash. So even if Cuvo does find a nice blink in, BMT can likely get out of the majority of situations alive, at least in the early game, until this Camazotz gets something like a Heartseeker that's going to turn every single ability into a pseudo-execute. I think that Radiance are in a much better position. But now, again, I think we're going to have a very similar pace as we did in Game 1. I think both teams are going to be relatively content with just kind of waiting it out till the late game and getting these 5-on-5s.
Yeah, but it looks like Adapting has something else in mind. Nearly getting the kill onto Cuvo Fred. That's that level 5 difference there. Cuvo uses it defensively, Adapting immediately on the engage. And I think that's something that was missing in Game 1 from Radiance as well. You know, I think we've piled on the Daji pick enough, but just in general, while neither team necessarily made massive waves early on with jungle pressure, this is going to be an important one where Cuvo Fred maybe needs a little extra time to scale up and get this Camazotz super difficult to deal with. Adapting now right off the bat has the ability to start to swing some of these waves in his own direction. Paul does as well. There's the stun down. Oh my god! So much damage on Tabenji, and Paul is there for the execute. Who needs a jungler when your mid laner can get it done?
Oh man, you know what? You'll get away with it this time, Dave. But yeah, Paul's nuts. Good rotation in there to shut down the Cthulhu very early on. But he does trade out his ultimate, and he doesn't have beads going for that early blink, meaning that he's gonna have to play pretty safe. If Adapting's ultimate comes up online before Paul's does, he should definitely be looking towards mid. That's essentially a free kill with the follow-up from BMT. So I think we're going to see a little bit of pressure onto the mid lane coming through from Radiance here, as long as the communication's on point. Paul should definitely be playing a little bit more cautiously, but, you know, he got away with it. He got the kill for himself. He's got about a half-level lead in the pocket. He's already finished up the boots as well, moving into what seems to be what is going to be a Doom Orb. I think that Paul has got himself a very strong start here. And a little bit earlier on, we got to see that engagement from Adapting, trying to find Cuvo Fred for First Blood. I think that's kind of a microcosmic look at what's going to be happening in a team fight every single time. That is how it should go down. Adapting goes in with the ultimate. If Cuvo's inside of it, he's going to use Bat Out of Hell to either dive the backline or disengage himself. And I think that's likely why we see him on this pick.
And you know, I kind of still look back towards Paul in the mid lane on this Hebo. Loves that Ron of Tahuti with his first item there. And when teams are maybe going to stop letting this guy get this pick, Cuvo Fred has to use the ultimate. Another exchange between Adapting and Cuvo. And another Cuvo Fred escape there thanks to the Bat Out of Hell, excuse me. But at this point, it's obvious almost that if this Hebo is left up, Paul is going to pick it up in some capacity, and has looked good, has looked iffy, but it seems like the ceiling, the consistency, or the potential rather, is high enough for Paul that other teams might have game planned around it a little bit differently, but it seems like week in, week out, Paul is on this pick out of the mid lane time and time again.
Yeah, the Paul bow's been a staple of his god pool since Season 0, my guy. Paul loves this pick. He come from Duel, he's meta there. You know, Paul makes his way to Conquest in the SPL, and he keeps his meta running. I think that it's very hard to dedicate any more bans to this guy. I mean, you got to worry about his Hell, his Morrigan, just all of these picks that Paul is incredibly adept at. I think that instead, Radiance decide that, okay, let's play our own game. Let's try and get some of our own picks. We got Cthulhu for ourselves. We got Hunbots as well. We've got Rom. They got a bunch of priority picks. Whereas on the other side, PK only picked really 2 of those top meta picks inside of Sobek and Amaterasu. Had they dedicated a ban to Hebo, it could have been a Persephone coming through from mid on PK. I think they made the right choice.
Well, Benji and Scary D dueling with one another here as Aurora's rotated his way over Looking for a blue buff invade here. Still feeling confident enough, but over to the side is Scary D. Cubo Fred just farming up some of the Harpies, so won't rotate in to try to help out his solo laner here. Scary D pinned between a couple, now locked down. No rotation over from the Knights. Obviously feeling confident that Scary D was going to be able to stay alive.
Yes, trust in your Scary D, but don't trust in him to pick up that blue buff. He's going to need some help there if we see Radiance make a concentrated effort to invade. But it seems like with BMT not hovering in mid, they don't have vision on PK. Radiance not really feeling confident enough to go for the invade themselves, and Cubo will eventually meander his way over, make sure that Scary D doesn't fall too far behind in lane. And because Radiance have that 2-sack inside a solo with Aurora and Benji, Scary D is going to passively pull slightly ahead since he's not splitting up his farm nearly as much.
Won't be Berserker Shield first time here for Scary D. So he's able to look it up thanks to Gormizer and his wonderful stat sheet here. Hebo is, and maybe it probably went without saying, the most picked god for PK. But there is a team that is tied PK and Hebo picks. I'm going to put you on the spot, Mifflin. Do you know who that is?
You're really going to quiz me on the spot? Everyone already thinks I'm done. Adapting's
going to bail you out! He's going to bail you out! Adapting rotates over to the solo lane, drops the Fear No Evil Law, but Scary D turns around the damage. Benji is able to get the kill, but it's a 2-for-1 trade. The tower dive this time goes the way of PK. The 1 kill pulled over for Benji as Scary D falls.
Yeah, you know what? I'll do it, Dave. I'll go ahead and try and take that guess after I address that team fight. Radiance
You're giving
just
your time
gets
to think.
a little bit overzealous on that aggression. Adapting goes in with the ultimate, doesn't quite find the value on it. Dazzling Offensive comes through in a big way. Cubo, with a counter rotation, comes in, doesn't have to use any of his utility just because of how deep in the tower Radiance were. We saw Adapting commits his Sacred Monkey as well as the leap. Inside that dive, he 100% commits himself. There's no way out. He has to find the kill, and he does. But he loses out in his life as well as Benji's. Here's the guess. Is it Ghost? Because I'm thinking Twig plays a lot of Hebo.
It is Ghost. They have matched the Hebo pick rate. Maybe not rate, but the number of individual Hebo picks from PK. It is Ghost. So there's a fun fact brought to you by Gormizer, and we love him and appreciate him for it. What you don't love and appreciate, I don't think, if you're Radiance, is that there's another 2-level lead forming here from Cubo Fred, and it might result in a kill. Bat Out of Hell could be used for the execute. Instead, Cubo Fred has found the kill, and the get-out-of-jail-free card is pulled. PK starting to pull away in the jungle.
Man, a lot of this early pressure going the way of PK's jungler is because Adapting, his first 3 or 4 ultimates of the game, were committed onto trying to shut down Cubo Fred every single time. Bat Out of Hell gets him out of that situation. Adapting has to go back and play a little bit more safely because his best engage tool is down. Cubo, on the flip side, farms up and continues finding ganks because Kanazot isn't completely reliant on his ultimate at this phase of the game just to find damage output. And Cubo doing a very good job of using that, utilizing that pressure that he has, finds a 2-level lead and a Pyromancer for his team.
That's right, and smart there, realizing where Radiance were going to rotate over towards, so Cubo Fred will pull this one for himself. It was, 15 minutes into the game in Game 1. We're chilling at a 1-to-1 scoreline, about 1,000 gold for PK. Now, as Doug shows us, 2,500 for the Knights. This is more maybe how we expected the pace of some of these games to go, especially game number 1. But it's this slow burn that's starting to really become worrisome, not only in the jungle, Mifflin, but you got to look at the 1-level lead. It was about 1.5 levels. Scary D was 2 levels up on Benji just a moment ago. Another blue buff invade, or a blue buff invade, rather, this time goes the way of the Knights. Still searching for the fight, though. It's Adapting this time, but Cubo Fred might still be able to stay alive. Did not have the Bat Out of Hell, but Scary D had plenty of damage. Adapting down for the 3rd time this game.
Yeah, Cubo pulls a 180 there, drops the Vampiric Bats, drops the Screech, Adapting's on no health. Scary D finds the finish there. I mean, again, it's just this constant pressure that they're trying to put onto Cubo, and Cubo's already addressed it. It looks like he's going to be moving into the Sledge in that 3rd item slot just to help out with the survivability as well. He says, Adapting, look, man, if you want to keep jumping on me, if you want to keep going for these kills, I'll just build some defense and someone else can kill units. That's how it's working out now. I don't imagine it ends, and now Cubo's lead is starting to balloon even further, and his mental lead as well, as he steals the speed.
Cyclone Spin invaded on by Neil here. One more shot! Doesn't have it, but maybe out of the mid lane, Aurora will have the damage onto Paul. Paul nearly turns around that kill. And finally a win now for Radiance, but Aurora and Cyclone Spin so low that Neil will thank him for it. takes a kill to go, please. And the Croc will work his way away. Adapting does not have the Fear No Evil and won't teleport his way over to Neilma either. That shows you, that's a good like heat check on the power of Paul right now, right? Has the Rod of Tahuti, likes the Soul Gem item after the boots. Nearly from almost no HP was able to turn around that fight and get a kill onto Aurora. This Knight squad, only 13 minutes into the game, has seemed to hit its stride already.
Yeah, if I'm Aurora, I'm not feeling confident about anything right now. Sure, you got the kill for yourself, but Paul has shown me that he's coming with a game plan, and that game plan has more damage than you could ever possibly imagine. This early Rada Tahuti is very expensive, but because of how that he played the early game, that early first blood onto Cthulhu, it makes it a little bit easier for him to itemize in towards that. Now it seems like it's going to be the Soul Gem coming up next, help out with a little bit of CDR, survivability, the damage output's already there. Paul is going to be a menace on the map, and it's because Adapting, again, has not used Fear No Evil onto Hebo a single time this game. He's been allowed to just kind of play freely in the early game. He wasn't punished for not picking up beads in that first slot. Now that he finally has them, and he's getting a little bit of cooldown, it's going to be even harder. Crushing Wave is a good tool to CC immune out this Fear No Evil, as are beads.
Right.
Adapting might have missed his window a little bit.
Right, Paul, regardless. Right, I mean, you look at a Crushing Wave. I mean, that's such, I think, a difficult thing to look at now if you're adapting, especially with Crushing Wave. If you're Paul, I'm just going to, you know, obviously it requires some good timing there, and beads are going to be available on the other side, but you got to be careful jumping onto a Hebo. He's just going to pop his ultimate, roll over half your HP, and then be CC immune on the back end. That's an interesting point there, Myth, where Radiance now have to be doubly careful about the timing they choose to jump onto anyone now from the Knights, especially if Neil is going to continue playing the way he is throughout a couple of games so far. Good plucks. This one to send Aurora the other direction as the Gold Fury locked in quickly, as you point out, by a nice rotation from PK.
Yeah, nearly 6,000 gold separating these two teams 15 minutes into the game. PK are in the driver's seat. They've desynced the neutral objectives as well, so Pyromancer going to be about a minute till that comes back up. Gold Fury, obviously, on a full cooldown, means that Radiance at no point is going to be able to split the map. If PK grouped on Gold Fury last game, Radiance would group on Pyro, or if in reverse, they would do the exact same. Now, Radiance, if they don't want to slip even further behind due to these desynced timers, are going to have to contest.
Yeah, Benji, you thought walking into any part of your jungle was safe. They don't get the kill, the Knights don't, but still may be worthwhile in getting the Cthulhu ultimate and the Cthulhu out of the fight. Kivo does take about half of his HP, might be able to sustain a Bat Out of Hell used defensively this time. Aurora dashes through to try to find the engagement. And the pressure continues on the right-hand side of this map. It is a 2-level lead, yes, Myth, out of the jungle, but Scary D has extended his lead to about 2.5. Was 3 just a moment ago before Benji ticked over to 14, so well placed is the Knights' pressure here up to this point. No surprise that they're forcing things on the right-hand side of the map.
And now that Pyromancer is respawned, and we know that Radiance has committed a bunch of their teamfight utility as well as the most present one on that side of the map inside of this Cthulhu ult. PK could very easily immediately group up on Pyro, try and take that one down. If Radiance group up in defense, I'm assuming PK would look for the fight, and if they do win the engagement, they could even look towards an early Fire Giant at this point if they have Zapman rotate out. If not, they could group up on mid and try and take out that tier 1 tower. PK's got free reign right now, and they're in the driver's seat. They have to drive. Let's see where they take it.
Scary D with his Frostbound Bear wailing away on the Benji.
This is
stop!
toxic.
Please stop it, he says, but Scary D just walking at him, has to throw down the root. Scary D's still going. He's going to pop the Dazzling Offensive and the Thorns. I mean, what do you do, man? You're just getting walked at by an Amaterasu with Shoguns, Berserkers, and Frostbound and can't do anything about it, and maybe you hope that the rest of your team can answer back.
No.
Beads used. That's a pump fake by Adapting. Well played there, and now a double stun onto the Knights, taking maybe a little bit more damage than they bargained for.
Neil gets hit by the ultimate. Fear No Evil drops down. No kill just yet. Terra drops her ultimate as well, but now to disengage, PK's here.
Oh, nice by Paul to finally get rid of Adapting now. Tossed to the side. This big man Tink's killing spree for the Kamazats and the Knights. Aurora trying to walk himself away, but not gonna happen when Paul has the execute. Cyclone Spin pushed down most of the left-hand side of the map. Benji here to play as well. But this is a big, big win for the Knights.
Yeah, Adapting has the nuttiest pump fake, blink in, walk
I
away.
love it,
Paul
dude.
drops his beads in pure fear. And then once Adapting goes for the re-engage, instead of looking for Paul, he goes on to Neil Ma, the support. I mean, you could be concerned about, sure, Paul could use Crushing Wave to disengage himself, but you gotta at least go for the winning play. But now Neil Ma makes it out alive. Paul picks up a ton of kills for his team, and now Fire Giant and Pyromancer as well. PK with this lead, we might be looking at a quick one.
Yeah, they're about 8,000 in the lead. 18 minutes in. It's an 18-minute
the
Fire
towers
Giant.
left.
10,000 in the XP department. Fantastic point, Mifflin. There were still 5 of 6 towers standing before Cubo Fred locked that one down. Some interesting counterplay. Snipes for Cyclone Spin are going to have to hit their mark on the end of things here. Cubo Fred will stay alive. So yeah, now 4 towers still left for the Knights to really pull this one out of control. I mean, Radiance have an uphill battle as it is, but there's still a lot of gold to be gained for the Knights, and they are whittling away everything.
And this early on in the game, with a Fire Giant at 17 minutes going the way of PK, they don't have to get a Phoenix here. I'm sure they would absolutely like one, but if they just strip away the left side towers, the mid tower, and then back up to Oni Fury, and then push down right with that, they've got so much time to work with, and Radiance are trying to do exactly what they did last game. Well, we can't fight them. It's a huge lead and Fire Giant. Let's go ahead and try and split up the map, try and slow down this push. But PK have already made the adjustment. Instead of grouping up as 5 on that duo side of the map, they're splitting their own push. No way Radiant's going to match the value that they're about to get. Now 2 tier 2 towers falling. Again, Oni minion spawning in about 10 seconds. PK is pulling even further ahead.
I do think it's wild, and maybe changes as the game goes on, that Benji at 3 levels down, 4 a moment ago, still has the same amount of damage effectively. About 60, literally 60, not 1,000, not 100, but 60 damage ahead of Scary D here. So the Cthulhu at least able to chunk some damage down despite being sat on the entire game. There's a collapse here onto Adapting. It's going to be the Fear No Evil used, traded out by the dazzling offensive.
TV.
Nice sidestep there, and the leap away. He's immediately walking into Phoenix range. Ollie blinks through, and Scary D doesn't have the final bit of damage. The Titan swing on him once. He's not going to do it. Scary D on the chase. The Phoenix will get it at the end of the day. Adapting does go down, but the Knights, they take the Fury in the meantime.
Hey, good for Adapting, making sure that kill doesn't pad out any of the opposition. He wants the best KD in the league, and that's one way to do it. Well, maybe not going 0-5 in general, but it's better than it landing on Scary D or landing on Paul, so I guess he gets at least a little bit of value as he strips back a little bit of experience through that split push. A little bit overzealous on that side of the map. But there we saw again the patience coming in through from PK. Zatman, knowing that he's in 0 danger despite getting hit by Fear No Evil, holds on to the beads, holds on to the Aegis, holds on to his ultimate as well, says, I don't care, man. Look, my team's here, they'll kill you anyway, and if I die, I'll just yell at them because they played wrong. And now PK can continue their onslaught. This right side tier 2 tower, that's going down for free, and they've still got about 45 seconds left on this Fire Giant buff. They could very easily look for a Phoenix.
Yeah, and they should. Adapting just now back off of respawn. No Fear No Evil for the next few seconds. So a small window where the Knights don't have to deal with a lot of what Adapting is hoping to do this game. Frenzy popped. Oh, double stun. That's Big Man Ting's Q. Fred, perfect timing on the bat out of hell. One snipe from Cyclone Spin will get it done, but it's a blink away from Cubo Fred. Now Benji, big time ultimate here to lock PK right where they are. Somehow Radiance doing a lot of the damage, but Zapman kites backwards, turns it around, Adapting down once more.
It's just Radiance chase out so far. They didn't have the concentrated damage. It was only Benji in range to follow up on the late, very deep team fight. So immediately PK realized, okay, well now suddenly it's a 4 versus 1. Let's turn around. And Adapting loses out on his life just because Zapman's damage output is absolutely ridiculous at this point. But Radiance do a good job of maintaining their base. That right side Phoenix remains standing, as does the center. But Fire Giant coming up in about 45 seconds. PK are very easily going to get the vision advantage. They've still got nearly 14,000 gold in the lead. And at 22 minutes, that's crippling, okay? We were looking at a similar lead last game, but that was 40 minutes in when everyone was already 6 items slotted. Radiance is broke at this point. They're just now moving into their 6th item. Some of them are still working on their 5th items, 4th items, truthfully, if you don't want to count a blessing. Looking at you adapting as he looks to move into that Hydra's Lament, it looks like, trying to top up on CDR. Radiance is going to have a very hard time if they want to fight into this. I think it might just be better off for them if they group up as 5 and try and play around the defense on Phoenix.
And that's the right and I think an interesting point to bring up here. There's going to have to be something different from Radiance. Aurora plucked, but obviously won't be displaced there. Just the stun sticking from Neoma this time. Blue buff dropped down in lockdown. Paul wasn't here for this fight. The Knights not even looking for the FG, instead for an engagement. Neil melted down. So now the Sobek is going to have to sustain up just a little bit extra here, and with that, Radiance might have done enough to slow down this FG.
Yeah, there's the silver lining. We saw it right there. And the win condition for Radiant. Cyclone Spin is the only one who's doing real sizable amounts of damage there. Just a couple of auto attacks drops Neomato about 30% HP. If Cyclone's allowed to in these team fights, if he's able to free reign, free cast, if someone can just shut down Paul and make sure that this Hebo isn't able to get onto Cyclone, that's one way in for Radiance.
Well, the Pyromancer will allow Neil to rejoin the fight a little bit quicker. Fear No Evil is trying to peel out for adapting here. Did a decent job at it. Zatman will connect onto his ultimate up to the sky. Believe that's a roar, and it is. Down. He flies, but only into death as Scary D locks in the kill. The rest of Radiance left retreating. Should be the FG call for PK.
Yeah, Roar's, this is 2 games in a row now on this Terra where he's kind of engaged in the back line with his ultimate, but his team just isn't in range to follow up, and he trades out on his life.
Oh, the snipes may be enough, but the charge is used just a little bit too soon. Benji still controlling a lot of the pace here. Walks in, 3-man knockup on the back line. Look at the damage that PK are taking. Benji as well down to half HP. Cubo Fred lurking off to the side. The Knights feeling confident here. No Aurora for the next little bit. Looks like one big ultimate from Benji is enough yet again to keep the Knights at bay. I mean, this is house money at this point for PK, or for Radiance rather, at least in the XP department. Everyone outside of Neil is already at that level 20 mark, and everyone from Radiance slowly catching up.
But you can't expect Benji to do it again. No ultimate available for the Cthulhu, that main differentiating factor,
thorns.
able to force them off the Fire Giant. No Thorns either. Benji's going to be a sitting duck in this next engagement. His damage output's going to be low. With this attack speed build coming through from Zatman, his survivability is going to be low as well. I mean, Benji's almost a non-factor until that ultimate comes back up. Radiant's likely just going to have to let this Fire Giant go if PK decide to group up on it, but it seems like with them hovering, I mean, Cuvo's spotted out adapting in mid, Benji already on the Fire Giant, not willing to give it up. Radiance seem like they're willing to fight still.
Half HP, still no ultimate for Benji, still no Thorns. No update on that department. Aurora in Frenzy, ultimate. Nobody else from Radiance there just yet. Zatman again will ult away the Terra. Scary D, though, as such, left alone with Cubo Fred. And Neil now on the front line. Scary D has gotten the kill. Down goes Cyclone Spin. Has to use the Aegis, and that'll keep him alive for the time being. But Paul, he has to re-engage. It's a beads from adapting to save his life. Crushing Wave to get back into range, and a double stun from Big Man Tings will do nothing but buy a little bit of time, and that's what Radiance are running out of here. PK not looking for the end, instead back to the FG.
It's an interesting call that they decided not to go for the end there, maybe because Benji's around with ultimate, and he's doing a ton of damage. Paul forced to retreat. There's so much going on here. No damage coming through yet. No ultimates available on the side of PK, but the damage output is there.
Yeah, but the rest of the Knights just turn around and walk at Benji. It happened the first time, won't happen a second. And now down to half HP is the FG, and nobody from Radiance will be in range. Finally, the Knights will grab their objective. This is a long time coming for the squad. A few disengages from Radiance delayed things out, but now 5 members strong, 3 open Phoenixes. This is going to have to be a look at the strength of the Radiance defensive comp. One that, you know, albeit a different comp in Game 1, but Radiance didn't necessarily put up huge fights around those Phoenix lines in Game 1, so have to see something different here in Game 2.
I mean, it's going to be a lot better just by merit of having a Hunbots on your team, that Fear No Evil, creating a no-play zone as well as just a CC field inside of your Phoenix with that unofficial 6-man. The damage output is there. Cyclone finishes up that Silver Branch, which is going to be a huge power spike for him. Going into this last team fight, Radiance has tools that they can use, but already we've seen what the tankiest member of Radiance is able to do. Benji, inside of his ultimate, still wasn't even able to survive the onslaught of 3 members of PK for more than 6 seconds there. I mean, if PK was worried about Benji going for the end off at the tail of that last team fight, clearly they shouldn't have been. 3 members were able to instantly burn through them. They likely could have moved their way into a Phoenix there, but instead, going for that safe play, adapting, trying his absolute best to tick himself over to 20, even if it does sacrifice a little bit of positioning around these Phoenixes. He's going to have to get back to base soon. He's one of the biggest tools that they have on the defense. Without Fear No Evil, there's no fight.
Adapting is now going back, but that's going to take a little bit of time to get there. The Knights won't force the issue. Adapting will be able to rejoin the rest of his squad a little bit sooner. Yeah, it's Soul Reaver and then Obsidian Shard for Paul, and that's what you expect. Half HP from 2 abilities from Paul? Are you serious? That's nuts. Benji cannot walk himself anywhere near Paul at this point. You are anywhere else on the map outside of this 5-1-4 Hebo in the mid lane. For PK, Cubo Fred has had a fantastic game. I'm effectively going to read everyone's name for the Knights because this has been a clean performance through and through. Now it's up to Radiance to rip this one away. This is what you call, what maybe Aggro calls, for giving him credit for things, the 99%er for PK. A 3-for-2 split. Adapting and Aurora find themselves squared off with Neil and Zap on the left-hand side. Benji works his way in. Scary D takes maybe a little bit more HP lost than he had bargained for there, and Benji has slowed things down for the time being. Big man Tings as well with some of that artillery stun is going to slow down the Knights.
PK's just got to play slowly until they see Adapting's ultimate go down, or maybe disengage right here. If they can live through it, it's their fight. Frenzy and ult from Aurora. Oh my god, Zapman. Good by Adapting for the 8th time, rampaging his Cubo Fred. 505 for the Kamazat out of the jungle. 3 members left alive from Radiance. Aurora is going to find a double root on the back line, but Cubo Fred fully separates things out here. The Knights, they walk themselves down the left-hand side of the map, and they might walk into the Titan room here shortly after. Man, Paul just on peel duty there. Sees Adapting blink in, says, oh, trick, water spout, that's 50% of your health, good luck. And now the Titan...
That's gotta be it here, Mifflin. Tap HP on the Titan. Knights waltz their way in. Cyclone Spin doing big damage, but not enough to keep up with what PK are outputting. The struggles continue, Mifflin, for this Radiant squad. That is now the 3rd loss in a row. They obviously have a game later today, so we'll see if they can round things out. Our 3rd and final set of the day will feature them. But this is clean from PK and a tough one for Adapting out of the jungle.
It's a nice turnaround from PK as well. It looks like they're playing incredibly clean. Clinical is the adjective I'd use to describe it, because they're not making any risky plays. Every single Fire Giant that they pull, they're willing to reset at 20% if Radiance showed any pressure on it, and then look for the team fight on the tail end. It was coordinated efforts on these Phoenix sieges as well. Re-engage, disengage whenever you need to, just working through the utility that Radiance had. PK is looking like they've definitely hit their stride.
I think so, and this is that team that always talks about playing their best Smite at the right time, and if this is what we can expect from this team moving forward, it's going to be hard. I mean, I get 1 prediction right last week, you get, I think, 1 or 2, whatever it was. This league, hard to lock in here at this point, and this shows you why. I think most of us, except for Gore Miser, voted for Radiance in this set, so hats off to Gore once more. PK, they take the 2-0 win. Quick break before we break down the set.
Radiance fall, PK rise, and what's the word Myth used to describe their play? Clinical. That's what we saw from them in game number 2, a 2-0 over Radiance. And now some troubles, I think, here, Gore, if you are a Radiance fan, if you are Team Radiance, as they're now on that 3-game losing streak that Dolson highlighted, and PK kind of surging here lately as well, playing cleanly, playing low-risk Smite, knowing the right moves to make at the right times, and daring their opposition to have an answer.
Yeah, it's kind of two ways to look at it. Like Radiance, you're looking at the fact that they have another set to play today, and maybe you're a little stressed out that things aren't going so well for their first game. Knights, on the other hand, you're looking at the fact that they win this, and they're looking like a team that is trying to climb their way up the standings right now. I mean, they have been very consistently 5th so far this year, but this is now starting to hit, especially with the way Radiance and Sanguine have been lately. 4th, maybe even able to rise into 3rd place team if they can keep this up against these top teams. It's been very good for them. And you know, I was actually looking at it. Adapting, it's been highlighted, didn't really have that great of a game. There were several times where, I mean, even here, he's 2 levels down, and that's about 11 minutes into the game. But I think Scary D, Cuvo, and Paul played out of their minds throughout all of this. Scary D specifically, I think towards the latter half of this game, just kind of started popping off. Like, there's a certain moment where this Amaterasu showed no fear anymore, and Scary D really got to showcase what he had.
A great team at playing with a lead. I think PK are, I mean, that's what they showed us as part of their Worlds run as well, is how good this team is at capitalizing when they have their leads. But this is also a team that I think just knows how to play well together. Really impressed with some of the stuff we were able to see Paul doing in this set. We doubted, I don't know if we doubted the success of the Camazotz, but we said there were better picks to take into that situation. Well, Cubo Fred certainly showed us that he can make Camazotz work. 6-0-5 was the performance that he had on this one too. And I think that PK are also showing us that they know the right stuff to prioritize in their draft. Both of these games, they made sure to take the Amaterasu and the Sobek with their top 2 pick score, making sure they had locked down what their engage was going to be, what their frontline presence was going to be, what Neil and Scary D were going to be doing, and they absolutely executed on it. Zatman is able to free cast his Heimdall in the back because he has all that frontline set up here for him in the game, and they made sure to prioritize it in the drafting phase both games.
And honestly, I was looking at it. It's not often that this stat really ever stands out on the screen, but 28 wards placed by Neil as well. Like, just vision for the Knights, I think, being able to showcase how he used that lead that they had. So making sure that he was in the right place, like you said, creating a very good cushion for everybody else there. And you have to watch this. Sanguine, you know, they're 6-5 right now. The Knights are 6-6. Sanguine with one more game to play, you know, today. And I believe with the Knights playing again and just a couple days up against the, I believe it's Obey later this week. So they've got this at least capabilities laid out for them to maybe jump the hurdle into the top 4.
Certainly at that 500 mark now, at that 6-6 record. So that puts a lot of pressure, I think, on this very next set. We're about to watch Sanguine play where PK could tie back up. And then because they both have sets later on this week, PK Obey and Sanguine Obey, we have our new 4th place team potentially, or Sanguine could obviously right the ship if they're able to get a win up against Ghost or Sanguine. Or Ghost or up against Obey. Their sets they have a little bit later on. So a lot, I think, to be determined throughout this weekend, not just in that 4th place matchup and how that's going to be going, but are Radiance going to be able to bounce back, right, and get things going? Are Obey going to continue surging? A lot to learn from these sets that we're about to watch throughout the rest here of this weekend. But the team that won here today, PK, are the team that are feeling good. Zatman is the one that's standing by for the post-game interview.
That's right. Zatman is now with me. First of all, Zatman, congrats to you guys, not only on the 2-0 over Radiance today, but you beat Sanguine last week as well. You're now on back-to-back wins, especially over these top 4 teams. Do you think that this Knight squad is finally starting to hit that stride and you can get some wins against effectively anyone in this league on a pretty consistent basis?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's getting closer to Worlds. You know, it's almost October, so it's time for us to stop playing a little crazy, stop trying to do all this nonsense stuff that we do all the time, and we're kind of focused on being disciplined. That's why you saw some of those games, even though we had leads, they kind of took long to close out just because we're trying to play clean, practice our sieges and things like that. So, yeah, we're definitely hitting our stride.
Yeah, it absolutely worked for you guys. And one of the big pieces of utility, damage, and CC, I suppose, in both games was Hebo for Paul. Are you surprised at all that teams are still consistently giving that pick over to you guys? I mean, it seems about as automatic as it comes there in the mid lane. At what point do teams maybe start to prioritize that ban-wise against you guys?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure we have a losing record with Hebo overall, which is kind of funny because one of Paul's signature picks.
Right.
But, you know, we don't really care if they ban it out because we don't think people can really ban out Paul. A lot of teams like to do that kind of strategy, but Paul has gods you haven't even heard of that he's been playing and practicing. You know what I mean? He's just waiting to bring them out. So maybe they should ban Hebo so we can whip out some of those new picks.
That's right. Yeah, for our sake, maybe bring out something new. For you, the Heimdall worked out here in this set. What do you feel, or how do you feel, rather, about him as a hunter at the moment? Obviously, they banned out Cupid a little bit later on. The Rom was Radiance's first pick priority throughout this set. Heimdall, obviously, still in a really good spot in your eyes.
Yeah, Heim is decent. He's not really on the top tier like Rama and Cupid. His clear is slow, and his jungle's clear slow early. That's why you don't really see him get picked. He doesn't really get the pressure in lane. But if you can get through that early phase and get your boots online, he's as strong as he was before. So you just got to kind of weather that storm. And it's just a pick I've been liking. I've been going Ichabod third, which kind of helps me against the steroid hunters, which is why you saw me build that against the Rama. And I've just been liking him. He's just kind of like a god I wanted to play this weekend. So I was like, just, you know, pick me Heim.
Yeah, why not? And you were swinging with him by the end of those games. Congrats again, Zapman. Next couple of games for you guys against Obey and Renegade, so definitely something to look forward to there. So best of luck in the future. Everyone at home, stick around. Ghost versus Sanguine up next after this break.